Good morning, Tommy, and welcome to the Low Carb Paleo Show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Good morning, Mark.
Good
How's
morning.
everything in England?
Wonderful, thank you. Can't complain at all.
Can't complain.
Nope, not allowed. No complaining allowed at all today.
No, but you can. That's okay. We won't listen, but I'm used to it, you know. Actually, of the two, I'm the one complaining the most. So he's very stiff upper lip, very English, very British. So, Tommy, your friend Mark Pettus suggested we talk to you, and here you are. A short introduction. You are the Senior Fellow at the Pediatrics Department at the University of Washington, Chief Scientific Officer at Nourish, Balance, Thrive, an online-based company using advanced biochemical testing to optimize performance in athletes. That was a mouthful. Can you tell us about your background? What can you tell us? How do you came about to, because you're, technically, are you British or are you American?
I'm technically both, and also Icelandic. I have triple citizenship for anybody who's counting.
Wow.
So, as you can probably tell, I was raised in the United Kingdom, mainly. My dad's English, my mum is Icelandic. I was born in the US, but wasn't there for long enough for the accent to stick. So I did most of my training in the UK. I have an undergraduate degree in biochemistry from the University of Cambridge. Then I went to Oxford for medical school. I worked in central London for a couple of years as a junior doctor, and then moved to Norway to do a PhD. I have a PhD in physiology and neuroscience, mainly looking at brain injury in babies and how to treat brain injury in babies. That's kind of where most of my academic work has been focused. But on the side, over the last decade, 15 years, I've done a lot of coaching, working with athletes, and now that's what I spend most of my time doing. And I'm currently based in Seattle in the United States.
Right. So are you a baby whisperer or athlete whisperer?
A bit of both. Most of my research is in the lab with animals. So I'm the baby rat whisperer more than the baby whisperer.
Okay.
But then also, but hopefully more with athletes. That's why I spend most of my time at the moment.
So how did you come to work with Nourish, Balance, Thrive? So
Nourish, Balance, Thrive is, like you said, an online-based company. We work with athletes, but also with people with various chronic health issues. And the idea is we want to just help people perform as they want to in the fields or the areas that they want to perform in for as long as possible. So basically making people as healthy as possible for as long as possible. That's our goal. And it was started, as you've mentioned, mainly to work with athletes by a guy called Christopher Kelly, who's our CEO. He's a former computer software engineer and was a professional level mountain biker. But because of all the various, the way the traditional endurance athlete is told to eat and the way they're told to train, for most people, that's actually pretty bad for their health. And that was certainly the case for him. And then he figured out how to fix himself by fixing his diet and various other things, and then started a company to help people do that. And there's a whole host of endurance athletes have come out of the woodwork with exactly the same issues, which obviously isn't surprising. And I heard him talking on a podcast, actually, while I was doing my PhD, and I reached out to him, and we started a dialogue, and I sent him, about 4,000 research papers on various things that I found interesting that I thought he might find interesting. And eventually I became Chief Medical Officer and now Chief Scientific Officer, just because we're in the US. I have a medical degree, but I don't have a medical license in the US. My medical license is in the UK. So I'm Chief Scientific Officer, focusing on the research and then also coaching the athletes directly.
Okay, cool. I noticed on the website there's a motto. It says optimum fitness and health. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, it's essentially being able to do the things that you want to do and feeling good while you're doing them. And for an athlete, that may be something that pays the bills. You may be a sponsored professional triathlete, and you need to be able to perform well at triathlon to be able to, make sure you get a paycheck, and that's where you earn your living. But equally, it may be optimal health and fitness may just be somebody who wants to be able to play with their grandkids, or feel good without pain, be able to move, be able to do everything they want to do, be able to perform well at work or well with their family for as long as possible. So it's a very subjective thing, and I think if you're truly healthy and happy and you're able to do all the things that matter to you, I think that should really be the focus in terms of trying to improve health.
The ever elusive happiness.
Yes.
Yeah. I always like to say that happiness is a concept that was created by marketing people to make us feel miserable.
Yeah, so being happy actually isn't enough to help to make you be healthy or live a long time. But
right. But can you switch that around, and can you say that being healthy and accomplished can make you happy?
Well, I think the main thing is actually living what you subjectively feel is a meaningful life is the most important thing. So happiness comes and goes, and occasionally you'll feel happy and occasionally you feel sad, and that's perfectly normal. Nobody should be happy all the time, or else that's probably pathological. We'll put it that way.
Right. They're using some pills.
Yeah, maybe. Well, the pills often don't work as well as we're told. But yeah, just living a life that you think is meaningful to you, and you're doing things that are meaningful to you. That's the important thing, and happiness will come along the way.
Yeah, I've always found myself to be suspicious of people that act happy all the time. They don't seem human, right? Or either that, or they're hiding something. They're not really happy, but they pretend to be happy. Because as you come from Europe as well, so we tend to be a little more down to earth about it. If you're happy, you're happy, but if you're sad, process it. I mean, deal with it, process it. Don't pretend to be happy when you're sad, and just, go with the flow. And then eventually you're going to come out the other side, and you'll be okay again. But I find that the American culture emphasizes happiness to the detriment of actually feeling our feelings. I know we're not talking, it's not your forte, psychology, but what do you have to say about this?
I completely agree. And on both counts, it's not my forte, but it's incredibly important. And that's something that we've figured out a lot ourselves too. So we recently brought in a fabulous performance psychologist who works with pretty much all of our clients, because be it the way you think about what you eat, or the exercise you do, or how you respond to stresses in your environment, or whether you want to create behavior change, the psychology of that is incredibly important. And I think almost everybody needs some help there. But yeah, being able to be sad or upset is incredibly important. And I often tell a story of a friend of mine who got married fairly young, moved country, wasn't around his friends and family, and got a new job which he didn't really like, and eventually went to the doctor, wasn't feeling good, and was diagnosed with depression, but actually just figured out that he was in a new country, he had no friends, he didn't like his job, and actually he didn't really like his wife, and that's a perfectly normal reaction. He's not depressed. It's a perfectly normal reaction to the situation he's in, and you don't need a drug for that. You just need to change the environment. So I completely agree. It's all very important part.
So psychology is also part of your program.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. A very, very important part, because I can often have a great idea what you might need to eat, or how you might need to change your training, or maybe a supplement that I think you should take. But how you build that into a habit that helps you, create a healthy environment or lifestyle that's going to work for you, decades into the future. The psychology is the most important part. So we can know what we think somebody should do, but whether they actually do it and it benefits them, that all comes down to the psychology.
Right. It must be that infamous Puritan spirit that forces Americans to repress their feelings. Mark, I teased him about it one day, and because we were talking about this kind of tendency in Americans, and I said, why what happened? Mark, remind me what you said about you sent all the bad ones to America.
And that was Australia.
It was Australia, I think. Yes, that was the first port of call.
No. You send the criminals to Australia, but the Puritans, you send them to Americans, right?
Well, this is true. Yes, yeah. I don't think we sent them. I think they sort of left of their own volition.
Yeah, but they were.
And
Yeah, if you think that being persecuted is their own volition, yes.
yes. Yeah.
And yeah, right. Okay, so now that we clear that, back to business. So you work on the diet side of things with clients?
Yes, we basically deconstruct and reconstruct all aspects of lifestyle as necessary. So diet is obviously very important, but then we do all the other stuff: sleep, distress tolerance, being able to handle stresses, how to deal with those, and then also movement or exercise or whatever it is that they do, be they an athlete or not. So pretty much everything can come under scrutiny as and when is necessary. But then, the idea is to build somebody back up such that they become robust and healthy for as long as possible. And we put people in a place where they don't need us anymore. That's always the goal.
So typically, what diet do you recommend? Do you have a favorite diet, or is just adapted to the client?
Yeah, absolutely. All of them. I like all the diets. So I do adapt them to the client. This is obviously the low carb paleo show, and those are two aspects that we use a lot. So often an elimination type diet, starting with something like Paleo Whole 30 is a great place to start for many people, depending on what's going on. Restricting carbohydrates, often very important in people if they have some kind of metabolic or health issues. However, I think it's worth saying that carbohydrates aren't inherently evil, and we do work with a lot of athletes, and carbohydrates used in the right way do improve performance. So, getting the right balance and making sure that you're doing that properly is very important. And sometimes we'll go exactly the opposite way. So there are some people who usually we think because there's something going on in the gut, they don't tolerate high fat diets very well, particularly refined fats, bulletproof coffee, all that kind of stuff. And we'll go, for a short period of time down the low fat, plant-based, whole foods kind of way, and then we'll slowly add back in foods, animal foods that have some the nutrient dense ones like sardines and liver and egg yolks and things like that. So
right.
The whole spectrum we use depending on what the person in front of us.
What's your impression of the new trend towards keto diet?
Towards the
keto diet, ketogenic?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, that sort of restricting carbohydrates, particularly in people with metabolic disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, I think that should be standard of care. And I don't imagine many people listening to this would disagree. You'll see the great data coming out of things like Verta, where they're doing now studies in people, ketogenic diet and type 2 diabetes, dramatic improvements in glucose control, dramatic or reductions in terms of the amount of medications that people need, and sustainable health and weight loss. I don't think that everybody needs that, and I always think that if you're actually truly metabolically healthy, you should be able to tolerate quite a wide range of foods without it adversely affecting how your brain functions or your blood sugar levels. But some people, because of everything they've been exposed to, everything they've done in their lives, they need that a ketogenic diet in the long term. So yes, incredibly powerful when used in the right scenarios.
Right. So you used one of my favorite words, balance. And this is a personal impression, but don't you feel that the keto diet is imbalanced? Too much fat, not enough of balance. Is it really healthy for everyone, or is it specific? Should it be specific to certain people and certain health issues?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something where a lot of people who have concerns about the ketogenic diet will come up and say, this probably isn't something that any human was exposed to in the long term, as part of our evolution. And I think that's true. Wherever you were on the planet, usually the further you are away from the equator, probably the more likely it was that you would have spent time in ketosis. So I have a Scandinavian North American heritage, so there's probably throughout the winter I probably didn't eat any carbohydrates, or my ancestors didn't. So that's probably something that I'm adapted to. People who live close to the equator, that's maybe less of the case. If you look at long-term studies of ketogenic diets, so particularly in kids with epilepsy, there are some issues that come up in terms of failure to thrive or not growing properly, some nutrient deficiencies. But some of those diets were really poorly formulated. They were basically giving kids just liters of soybean oil and calling it good. So I think if you're really focusing on the nutrients in your food, that will make a big difference. And equally, you know, there are some people who've struggled with a number of health issues for a long period of time, and that could be mental health, or it could be gut related. And when they go on a good, well formulated ketogenic diet, they just feel so much better. And I think that subjective, the subjective quality of life is really underestimated in terms of how important it is. So you can worry about things on the biochemistry and the blood test results, and yes, that's, you know, interesting, and it's certainly worth worrying about in some people. But if somebody changes their diet, they go on a ketogenic diet, and they just feel really good all the time, and they used to feel really crap all the time, then I think that really does tell you something. But absolutely, there are some people, plenty of people we work with, where they've tried a ketogenic diet, you know, they've done it well they tried it for whatever reason, or we thought it might be a good idea for whatever reason, and it just doesn't work for them. So then we'll try something else, and I think that's fine too.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you really you look at the client separately, at your clients separately from each other, and then you adapt. You recommend a diet that would most likely work for them, instead of using a blanket diet for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll have to admit that sometimes we're wrong. You know, it is partly an empirical process. You think, this is the picture in front of me, I think this will be the right thing to try. And sometimes it just doesn't work for people. So you have to try something else. And we're at a point in time where that's still what we have to do. And there's many parts of medicine actually where you know, if you look back maybe 50 to 100 years, elimination diets were the standard of care for various things, but it required some tinkering. You had to take stuff out, add stuff in, and sort of figure out what worked best. And we're still there. However, you know, hopefully as we generate more data, we start to understand stuff better. We can maybe develop some tools to help predict what might be the best approach, and how we might want to change that over time.
Right. So, I thought of a question, and all of a sudden it's gone. Oh yeah. How do you figure out, I mean, what kind of test do you take to figure out what would be the proper diet for your clients?
So we've traditionally done quite a lot of testing. It's quite a comprehensive program. We've done blood testing, some urine testing, something called urinary organic acids, which can give you some idea of nutrient requirements and some of the other things that are going on inside the body. We look at hormones. Sometimes we look at those in urine tests. Often now we look at those in the blood. And then we have a lot of athletes with gut issues and gut symptoms. So we'll often do stool tests and things like that to try and figure out what's going on in the gut. So all of that comes together. And then also the history. So they tell us because we work with people who are usually, they've spent a lot of time working on this themselves. And so they listen to lots of podcasts, read lots of blog posts. They've spent some time on the journey already. So they will already have a good idea of what does and doesn't work for them. And so that's important information to take into account. And then based on all of that stuff, we might look at the macronutrients. So protein, fat, carbohydrates, whether we need to work with that. We have lots of ways of assessing nutrient requirements. So maybe they'll need to increase foods that contain certain nutrients, or we'll supplement with certain nutrients, B vitamins or multivitamin or other minerals or things like that, which are often very important. And then, like I said, there can be a bit of a trial and error. We hopefully will get people to a point where they don't need to take supplements, they don't need to add stuff in, they just have a diet that sustains and nourishes them every day, and without having to add extra stuff in. But equally, sometimes you just need to stay on top of certain nutrients, and then you can supplement with those as needed.
Right. And if I understand this right, typically those tests points out what is not there or what is needed. Is that typically the whole picture, or could that lead you in the right direction but not necessarily give you the whole? Because someone could be short in lacking potassium or this or that, and it's easy enough to give a supplement, but how do you get the whole picture? How can you paint the whole picture with all these tests?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so we use multiple avenues. So you can look at both what the person eats to begin with. Then, like I said, you might look at the end products of metabolism in the urine, which give us an idea. And then we also test the levels of things in the blood. And we've actually, Chris, the CEO who I mentioned earlier, has developed some machine learning algorithms, which we have a sort of a separate tool called the blood calculator, which has basically taken, it's about 70,000 people's worth of blood tests now. And based on the measurements of various nutrients in their blood, so we're talking vitamin D, B12, folate, magnesium, all those kinds of things, based on some very simple blood tests, something that almost anybody could get from their doctor, we can predict, so you can see, so the algorithm can see patterns in the data that says, this person looks like somebody who has low B12, or this person looks like somebody who has low magnesium. And sort of if you bring all of that together, so multiple sort of points of view, then that can give you an idea of where you might want to intervene.
Right. So unlike the typical Western medicine doctor, you actually listen to your patients.
Yes, that's very important. We spend a lot of time talking to our patients. It's
right.
Online. We do conversations like this over Zoom. And then we also spend a lot of time in the team talking to each other, because each person has talked to the client, and you get a different part of the story, and it's very important to sort of fit all that stuff together. Absolutely.
So each one of you actually interview the clients separately, and then you get together and figure out amongst it, as a meeting, you figure out what you should do with that patient.
Yeah, exactly. So I am often one of the first people to speak to somebody when they come in, just kind of figure out what they want, what's been going on with them. And then we have some coaches who work with them on various aspects of nutrition and other parts of the lifestyle. And we'll, twice a week, I get together with all the coaches, and we talk about clients as things come up and try and integrate the best plan. And that changes over time. And we work with people
right.
for many months at a time, because a lot of this stuff, takes a while to figure out.
So do you, throughout time, do you adjust the diet accordingly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that's always important to remember, is that what works for you now may not work for you in the future, or may not be the best thing for you in the future. And, you have to be your own health advocate. So you have to figure out what's best for you. And we help people to figure that out, but they, that is going to be a continuous process. So if you're somebody who's passionate about your own health, that's just a process that you have to engage in, and be cognizant of the fact that just because something was the right tool at a given moment in time, and that could be dietary, so low carb or paleo, keto, maybe that worked really well for you at one point, but at some point you need to transition to something else. And if you again don't start to feel well, or other things start to come up, then it's time to maybe try something else.
Right. Of course, right here in the show, we tend to focus on the diet side of things, but there's other aspects, sleep, stress level. Can you address some of that? Yeah,
that's all of that is incredibly important, and again, will depend from person to person. So there's no such thing as like the perfect amount of sleep, but talking to people about how they feel when they wake up, the amount of time that they get to spend in bed, we might do some sleep tracking, and that's you can generate a lot of data now, and it's actually sort of in the research is coming up. There's now a pathology in terms of the amount of data that people collect and obsess over the data, and they obsess over how many minutes of each type of sleep that they had. And that's despite the fact that most of the things that you're using to measure this stuff aren't really that accurate. So you can gather some data, and that's important. But in reality, if you're talking about sleep, getting to sleep in good time, so you have a good amount of time in bed. It's dark inside, and the corollary of that is that you need to get light during the day, outdoor sunlight, because the light that you get inside is not enough to properly set your circadian rhythm. So it's dark and it's cool, and you get some opportunity to relax before bedtime. That's going to be most of what you need to do, and giving yourself the time to do that is very important. But other things can pop up, and maybe addressing other factors. It could be health issues. It could be maybe some small supplementation, some stuff that can help people get going. But again, the idea is to create a habit that will allow you to get good sleep as often as possible. And then, the stress thing, again, is very subjective. So there's no such thing as something that's stressful, right? So what might be stressful to me may not be stressful at all to you. And I think one of the best examples I have of this is about 6 months ago, I was at a meeting. We were looking at ways to improve the health of elite warfighters. So, basically like special ops kind of guys. And there was one of them there, and he said, when I'm under heavy gunfire, that is when I'm at my most relaxed. And I'm like, well, that sounds very stressful to me. I'd find that very stressful. He's like, what is most stressful to me is being at home and standing in the line at Target, right? So what is stressful to me isn't stressful to you, and you need to, the way you respond to that is what we need to work on, not the stresses themselves, if that makes sense. And then beyond that, something very important is your connection to other people. And if we're working with people who live alone or don't interact very much with their family, and this is one thing that happens a lot, particularly if somebody's gone down a dietary route. So say they've found the paleo diet, they found the low carb diet is working really well for them, but the rest of the family isn't involved. The rest of the family are eating something different. They don't necessarily, want to be involved in all of that. And that's very isolating. And social isolation, being isolated from your family and loved ones, that's a big part of long-term health as well. So all of this stuff comes into play, and it's finding those things that are sort of the chinks in people's armor and finding ways to sort of build those back up are really important. So often when people come to us, their diet looks great. The diet isn't something that I can really do that much with. It might be some other things we find on testing, or it might be addressing sleep quality. People with sleep apnea are very, very common and probably underdiagnosed, or that they're sort of people are isolated from their own family because of the health choices that they're making. So all of that becomes really important.
What do you typically recommend for stress to release, or control?
Yeah. So again, can be very personalized. So it might be sort of a scaled approach to the things that cause you stress. So again, we have Simon as a performance psychologist. So some of the aspects of cognitive behavioral therapy, slowly adapting the way that you expose yourself or respond to things that may be stressful. But then mindfulness, meditation, yoga, breath work, all of that can be really important. And even sometimes it requires an in-depth or honest conversation about the job that somebody does, or whether the exercise that they're doing, the sport that they're doing, whether it's actually benefiting them at all. And a lot of people have addictions or unhealthy relationships with exercise for various reasons, and talking about that, or talking about the relationship that people have with their family or their loved ones that may be stressful. So all of that can come into play depending on the person.
Right. Okay. Back to diet. What is your current diet?
So, my current diet is I'd call it paleo-esque. I've been very lucky that I haven't, unlike many people in this kind of arena, I haven't struggled with any particular health issues. So I think whole, real foods should be the basis of pretty much any diet, and that's sort of regardless of macronutrients. I grow some of my own food now because we've got some space in the house that we bought. I'm hopefully going to get chickens and a goat, and so we'll actually sort of start to produce some of my own food. Other than that, I just make sure that I get a reasonable protein intake, maybe sort of up to 2 grams per kilo of body weight. And then the sort of carbohydrate, fat, all that kind of stuff actually goes just based on hunger. And I used to be one of those guys who just eat a whole load of refined carbohydrates, and I get grumpy and angry with people. I had to eat all the time. But once you start to eat real food and actually train your body what it's like to respond to normal hunger cues, you can sort of like figure it out. So one day I'll probably eat a whole load of food, and then the next day I just won't be very hungry, so I'll eat less. And actually you can train yourself, your body, to sort of tell you what you need, and that's kind of how I follow things at the moment.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed at the last Paleo Effects event in Austin was coming from some people, there's a big push for the bone broth diet. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I wrote a review on the bone broth diet. I was asked, I think, one of the publishers so Kellyanne Petrucci wrote the book 2 or 3 years ago now. They asked me to review it. And think it's fine. There's certain aspects of it that make good sense. So it focuses on real whole foods. It focuses on, so adding, bone broth is obviously central to it. And there's lots of amino acids you can get from bone broth, minerals you can get from bone broth. We're probably all deficient in an amino acid called glycine, which you get from collagen, connective tissue, stuff like that. It's very important for methylation and maybe gut health and all those other kinds of things. So, bone broth can certainly help with that. It also talks about periods of fasting and things which can be very beneficial. If you read the book itself, I think there's a bit too much of a push to sell supplements, which are sort of linked to the diet by the author. And there's also some like body shaming in there, which I really hate that kind of stuff. So saying, are you happy being a little bit plump, or do you want to be lean and fit and sexy? And if it's the latter, then follow my diet. And I just hate that stuff. Kind of body shaming that people use to try and get people to do a certain thing. There's only detrimental. I see no benefit to it.
Yeah, body shaming as a sales pitch is not a good one.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the tenets, some of the basic ideas in there are great. It's just sort of some of the peripheral stuff. But I guess that's, again, you have a diet book. That's kind of like the marketing and sales stuff. So the actual nuts and bolts are great. Just ignore all the other stuff. Right.
From my point of view, again, going back to the balance principle, is that bone broth can definitely be part of a balanced diet, but it should not be the only focus of the diet.
No.
Which, as you may know, I've lived in this country for years. Americans have a tendency to go all hog, literally, in this, bad pun, but on a diet, and then all of a sudden everything goes wrong, right? So they go all paleo, all keto, all bone broth, and then 6 months later they realize it's not working for them. So I agree that bone broth should be part of it. I mean, I am taking bone broth, or I'm making soups with bone broth, but it's not my only source of nutrients. That's what I'm trying to tell people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, bone broth was this big, fabulous thing that came onto the scene a few years ago. But obviously, if you're a chef from the French culinary tradition, that's just stock, right? I mean, that's been made in... It's nothing new at all, You take the vegetables and the bones, and you cook them down, and you make a stock from them for sauces and soups and things. So that's something that you've been using for years. It's nothing new.
Right. It's funny how everything old is new again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I noticed that you also sometimes work with MS patients. How do you work with them, and what kind of diet do you recommend?
So this story goes back to some members of my family. So when I was at medical school, my mom, sort of the man that she eventually married, my stepdad, his son, now my stepbrother, who's exactly the same age as me, has multiple sclerosis. And my stepdad is a chemical engineer, and what chemical engineers are really good at doing is solving complex problems. That's essentially what they're taught to do. My wife's also a chemical engineer. And what we basically decided, so I was doing my medical degree, and so I had sort of like the biomedical, biochemistry side of things. They had the engineering side of things. We basically read hundreds, thousands of papers about all the various things that could be involved in both starting multiple sclerosis and then maybe hopefully reducing the disease burden or stopping it if possible. And we built, when we published a paper or two in this, and we've done lots of talks, and we built these huge sort of models of all the things and how they interact. And a lot of the stuff that comes out is dietary, lifestyle, toxins, infections, all that kind of stuff. And the kind of diet that seemed to make the most sense based on our analysis of all the literature was something close to like an autoimmune paleo type diet. And this is actually very similar to what Terry Walls if you've heard of her, we've
had her on the show a couple of times.
Yeah, great. And she's awesome, obviously. And so when we were doing that work originally, we had never heard of Terry Walls. Her diet way in one way, we came up with another way, and actually they seem to agree, which kind of makes me think, well, actually we might be on the right path there. So that's the kind of diet that we use. Intermittently, clients, people that I work with, will have multiple sclerosis. I don't have a multiple sclerosis focused practice. But that's the stuff. So that's what we'd focus on in terms of diet. But then again, going in and looking at everything else in terms of toxic exposures or infections, or other lifestyle aspects that are going to be very important. We go and look at that too. But that's how that sort of autoimmune paleo type diet is how we recommend people with MS start to eat, and that's how my stepbrother eats, and he's been in. You don't really go into true long-term remission for MS, or at least nobody thinks that you do yet. But he hasn't had any flares, or his MRI scans have actually improved over the last 3 or 4 years, and he sticks to a pretty strict autoimmune paleo diet. And we've done a whole load of other stuff too. And I can't say that it was the diet that fixed him, but the fact that he's healthy and happy and doing well is all that matters.
So you feel that it is possible to reverse or at least stop MS?
That's certainly been our experience in people who've done that. Definitely seen a dramatic increase or dramatic reduction in terms of the progression of the disease and the number of flares that they have. And there's obviously medications that neurologists will recommend, and we don't recommend. We definitely wouldn't tell people to stop their medications and stop talking to the neurologist. It's always in conjunction with their other medical care. But certainly the people that we know and the wider community have seem to be benefiting, at least from dietary changes that are having an impact on their disease burden.
Right. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. So you offer a fully integrated program to your clients. Can you tell us more about that program?
Yeah. So it's essentially all of the things that we've talked about. People will come to us, and they'll usually work with us for at least a year. Often we have people who stay on for multiple years, which is great, because then you really get to know people very well, and that's part of our process. We'd rather work with fewer people but do a better job. I guess that's the way you want to put it. Previously, people would sort of just come to us in bit parts, and they maybe do one test and they talk to us for an hour and then they disappear. And at one point we sat down and figured out that the people who were getting the best results were the people who we spent the most time with, and did things in a methodical manner. So then that's essentially the way that we like to work with people exclusively now. So you come to us, hopefully commit to working with us for at least a year, but you can always speak to one of the team first. So maybe you jump on a call with me or Clay, who's one of our coaches, and you just talk about whether it's going to be useful for you to work with us, because we want to make sure that's the case first. And then there'll be 2 or 3 consultations. We'll talk with me, some of the other coaches. We'll look at diet and sleep and stress and all those other things. We'll do some testing. We'll usually start with some blood testing, maybe some other testing, and then other things will come in as and when they're needed. And then it's a process of changing things over time. Maybe we need to address some specific issues. You'll work with Simon, our performance psychologist, to kind of talk through, what the stumbling blocks that are maybe, or things that are holding you back from things that you maybe want to change. So maybe you want to change your diet, but you've really struggled building good habits. You've struggled to find ways to make it sustainable. All of that comes into play, and then we'll slowly work through that over time, piece by piece, and in manageable chunks. How do you eat a whale one bite at a time? You don't just dump everything in right at the beginning and overwhelm people, and that makes it very difficult. So just working on things piece by piece to try and, like I said, build somebody who's robust and healthy and doesn't need us anymore, can go off into the world and and live their life and be happy and healthy. Right.
On the practical side, is your program reimbursed by health insurance?
Not reimbursed by health insurance, but you can use your health savings account to pay for it. So we have some people who have an HSA and have used that towards the cost of the program.
All right. Good to know. Thank you for telling us that. Mark, your turn.
Well, Tommy, you've given us some really good information. No one can deny that. Obviously, people are going to want to know where they can get hold of more information, get to know more about you and what you do. I take it you've got a rather good website that people can go to?
Yes, nourishbalancethrive.com. The company name is a bit of a mouthful, I'll admit. And we often have people who are like, yeah, nutrition, balance, something. So nourishbalancethrive.com, all one word. And from there are various things you can arrange to speak to one of us for a quick consultation, figure out if you want to work with us. We have multiple tools that I mentioned. So we have something called our Elite Performance Analysis tool. And this is basically, we took a few hundred of our clients, and everybody who works with us, does some subjective questionnaires. I talked about the importance of subjective quality of life. So there's things about how you sleep, sex drive, mental health, gut health, all that kind of stuff. And actually, based on those questions, we can predict some health issues, some underlying things that might be going on. It could be gut issues or metabolic health issues, issues with your circadian rhythm, and that's Chris's expertise in machine learning. And actually, they're really good at predicting this stuff, like much better than I thought it would. I was really surprised at how well it worked. I'll have to admit. So that's where people can get started. You can access that tool for free if you want to sort of just kind of dig into your own health. And then we have a similar thing with blood test results, but very in depth. We can predict a whole host of stuff. You can order the blood tests through us, and just get the output, and you don't need to even interact with any of the coaches or anything. You can just navigate that all by yourself if you like. We have coaches on hand if you want to speak to somebody. But that's kind of a separate service, and all of that's available through the website. So depending on what you're interested in, we also have I have an email, a weekly email which I write, which sort of is full of all this kind of stuff, practical tips and lots of research if people are into that kind of stuff. So you can sign up for that too. So all of those things are available through the website. That's the best way to go. Best place to go.
You also have your own website, right?
Yes, drragnar.com is where I started out. I had a podcast called the Eat Better podcast a couple of years ago with a friend of mine called Chloe. That website has been less well attended to recently, I'll put it that way. So there's all my old articles are on there. I'm in the process of updating it and having a separate place where everything will go on there. So in all, both the podcasts that I host and then also the one like interviews like this will go on there. So watch this space. Hopefully in the next month or two that website will be up and running again and looking a little bit more interesting.
Right.
Super. Well, as I said, you've been through a huge amount of stuff for us today. Is there anything that Alain hasn't asked you that he should have asked you?
That's a good question. No, I don't think so. I think we covered everything.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Super job. Well, I haven't got any difficult questions for you today. I've just been enthralled with what you're saying. So,
okay, that's good. If you come up with any difficult questions, feel free to throw them my way, and I can send you an email or whatever.
As you can tell, Mark likes to keep our guest on
tenterhooks, yes.
Yeah. Tender hooks, is that what you say?
Tenterhooks, yes.
Tenterhooks, okay.
Yes.
Thank you again, Tommy, for being on the Low Carb Paleo Show. And as we say in Texas, à votre santé, yo.
You hear that everywhere in Texas, you really do.
Yes.
Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if you heard that in Austin. That sounds like a kind of an Austin.
I know at least one person who says it in Austin.
Yeah. I think I know who that is. Yeah. Well, now it's worldwide, so it's gonna spread like wildfire. Okay. In case you wanted to know what